Hey, everybody. This is Andrew and John again on yet another episode of Sasquatchers. And today we have what I think is our most important guest to date. This is an episode that when I created this show that I definitely sought after. There's a lot of opinions in the world about this topic, and there's a lot of media attention, especially now with a new movie coming out. Um, so today's episode, hopefully it's insightful and, people of faith can take something away from it. But I'm also kind of looking forward to being scared a little bit by what we learn. I think the topic is scary, and it's supposed to be scary because those feelings that we have will, help guide us to faith in the book. Uh, Today we are speaking with Father Vince Lampert, an exorcist, and he's here now, and I'll let him go more in depth on the introduction. Nobody knows more about himself than he does. So thank you for coming on, Father. This is a huge pleasure for us.
Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
Andrew and John, it's good to be with you today. So, like you said, my name is Father Vince Lampert. I'm a Roman Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. I've been a priest since June the 1st of 1991, so 32 years as a priest. 18 years ago, the Bishop of Indianapolis appointed me to be the exorcist. So I've been in this role now for the past 18 years, and I currently receive many requests from people all over the United States, other parts of the world, who believe they're up against the forces of evil and who are seeking the help of the church. Many priests who are in my field prefer to remain anonymous, but I like to be public in the role just as a way to help educate people about what the Catholic Church believes and teaches, about the reality of evil, and what all of us can do to protect and safeguard ourselves.
That's interesting. So you said you've been doing this for about 18 years. How how did you end up, receiving that invitation to take on this role?
The Catholic belief is that the bishop in every diocese is the exorcist. It's based on chapter 9 of Luke's Gospel, where Jesus sends the 12 out and he gives them authority over all unclean spirits. And then Catholics believe that the bishops today are the successors to the original apostles, so that authority then has been passed down to them. And then the bishop of a particular diocese, at his own discretion, can choose one or more of his priests to do this ministry in his name. So the bishop who appointed me, ironically, was the rector of the college seminary that I attended in southern Indiana. He went on to become a bishop and then the bishop in Indianapolis. And I think because he knew me during my days in the seminary, he thought that I would be a good candidate for the role. The church says that a priest selected to be the exorcist should be known for his holiness, his piety, and someone who has a well balanced approach to this ministry, meaning I'm not too quick to believe that everyone who turns to me who says they're dealing with the demonic, that is actually the case, but to consider whether or not, is it spiritual? Is it a physical cause? Is it a mental cause? But to be able to look at each situation through various different angles.
Well, what are some of the methods that you use to kind of differentiate between what somebody might be experiencing as, say, a mental health break versus somebody who's actually then possessed by evil?
There's a protocol that I use. Step one of the protocol requires somebody to have a psychiatric evaluation. Doesn't mean that the church doesn't believe them, but if somebody is dealing with the demonic, they will need to be in a good place mentally before going through this particular rite of the church. And then they also need to see a medical doctor. So the church is asking experts in the mental health field and in the medical field, is there something about this person's condition that is outside of your scope of training or understanding? A lot of the signs that we would say are indications of possible demonic possession, can also be seen in people who are suffering things like schizophrenia, Tourette syndrome, and whatnot. It is important to note that I'm not asking the psychiatrist or the medical doctor, do you think this person is possessed? I will make that determination, but I want the best possible information that I can get. The church even says that I need to have moral certitude, meaning beyond a doubt the person in front of me is truly dealing with extraordinary demonic activity. So again, these experts will weigh in, share their expert opinion. I will then take that information, and then I would meet with the person and do an intake questionnaire. It's a series of questions that was put together by the Vatican course on exorcism, which I attended back in 2012. And really what I'm looking for is, if this is truly demonic, what was the entry point? How did the demon enter into this person's life? Because knowing how it entered in gives me the knowledge that I need to help close that entryway, if you will, by using the rite of the church. Step 4 of the protocol would be to look for 4 possible signs of demonic possession, which are based on the nature of a fallen angel, a demonic creature. One would be the ability to speak and understand languages otherwise unknown by the individual, having superhuman strength beyond the normal capacity of the individual, having elevated perception, knowledge about things that that person should not otherwise know, and then finally, a strong negative reaction to anything of a sacred nature, such as being in a church, a chapel, having the Bible read in front of them, being blessed with holy water, being shown a crucifix, and so on.
Okay, very interesting stuff there. I
Yeah.
could probably go in 10 different directions just based off of what you said there. So I'm going to try to keep everything copacetic.
Well, do
But
you think if so you I just if you mentioned when you were at the Vatican, the training course, and back in Rome, and I believe at the beginning of your book, when you were in Rome, you had observed 40 exorcisms. Um, so I was kind of wondering, what was that like, that experience? And at any point, did you ever wonder, like, oh, what am I doing? Like, how did I get here?
Absolutely. So the church says the best way to be an exorcist is through the apprenticeship model. When I was appointed back in '05, I became only one of 12 Catholic priests in the United States who were appointed to this role. So there really wasn't anyone to train under here in the States. My bishop sent me to Rome in the early part of 2006, and that gave me the opportunity to train under a Franciscan priest. And then he permitted me to sit in on 40 exorcisms that he performed during the time that I was there. And then that allowed me to learn firsthand the church's ministry to those who were up against the forces of evil and seeking the help of the church. And that experience was really invaluable. It's one thing to be able to read, all the book knowledge, but to really get a practical experience and application of how an exorcism is done. And I have to say that initially I was taken aback by things that I was able to see and witness, but it really reinforced my notion and belief that God is certainly more powerful than anything that the devil can throw our way. Because in an exorcism, the focus should always be on what God wants to do in the life of this person. Many people can get caught up by all the theatrics of the demonic, all the different manifestations that take place. But from a spiritual perspective, it's always important to stay focused on what God wants to do.
you mentioned the theatrics, and certainly the media has given us so many theatrics about what it is that you do. So I guess one thing that I would like to learn a little more about, you mentioned, the things that you look for to, gauge whether or not a person actually is possessed, knowledge of things that they shouldn't know, the superhuman strength, the voices, things like that. Um, can you go into detail on any of those things that you may have witnessed? Is there a particular case that you could maybe even identify a little bit, without going into?
Sure. No, absolutely. I think people always like stories. He takes it from theory to something very practical and real. Some of the signs that I've witnessed as a priest in doing exorcisms, there can be a change in the voice whereby it becomes much authoritative because the demon wants everyone to realize that it believes that it's in charge. There can be a change in the temperature of the room. It becomes much colder, eyes rolled in the back of the head, growling and snarling, hysteria, foaming at the mouth. So I've even witnessed where demons manifest and they cause the person's body to drop to the floor and begin to slither like a snake. I've witnessed levitations when demons have taken over. I did an exorcism once where the person's eyes turned green and the pupils became slanted like a serpent. And then his voice comes out of the person's mouth and says to me, well, you can't get rid of us because we've been here too long and you're not strong enough. I worked with somebody one time when the demon manifested. The demon bit the person's lip. And it is important to always make the clear distinction between the person as an individual and the demon who's now treating that body as if it were its own. So I would never say, for example, that John Doe did this or said that. I would always say the demon did it. So in this case, the demon bit the lower lip of the person, started bleeding, took the person's hand, put their hand in the blood, and then drew a pentagram on the wall with the blood.
No, wow. Yeah, that's freaky stuff. So how do you, I mean, obviously you're there as a servant of God. So you have to have that strength from within, but how do you as a human witness this and then maintain your course?
It's a challenge. In addition to doing this ministry, I'm also the pastor of 2 churches. And I think it's healthy as a priest not to do this ministry full time. I can't even imagine. I think being involved in daily church life kind of helps renew my spirit, if you will. Being able just to pray with people, visit them, do baptisms and weddings and funerals and that type of thing. I think that's very healthy and gives a good balance. But I can't imagine doing this, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think it would just be too all consuming.
Are there any priests that do it 24/7?
There are a few priests, I think, in the United States. There are 2 different types of priests. One can be a diocesan priest, like myself. Others can be religious order priests, like the priest who trained me. He's a Franciscan. The bishop who appointed me was a Benedictine. So they belong to a different religious order, if you will. And there are some exorcists that belong to religious orders. And so they do this ministry as their full-time responsibility.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I can't imagine. Um, so what is the goal of these demons once they inhabit a body? Are they just trying to kind of live and roam amongst us, or do they have other like nefarious tasks that they're up to? Like once they're in there, and uh, in a second I'll ask about perfectly possessed people if you adhere to that theory, but you know what do they what do they want to do once they're within a body?
And it might be good to go back a bit further and ask the question, where did these demons come from? So the belief is that they are fallen angels. God created angelic creatures, gave them infused knowledge, so they don't have to learn anything. It's like a computer being downloaded with information. So God creates these purely spiritual, intellectual creatures, gives them free will, and then God says to them, will you now complete your creation by uniting your free will with mine? And the belief is that Lucifer, one of the greatest angels that God had created, chose to say no, to not unite his free will with God. The book of Revelation in the New Testament of the Bible tells us that 1/3 of the dragon's tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky. So that is the belief that 1/3 of the angelic choir fell, and they now refer to Satan as their chief. We could say that the sin of Lucifer was the sin of pride. kind of the notion where he would say it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. And they were cast out of heaven down to the earth. So it is important to note that these demons were cast out of heaven, but they were not cast out of creation. They still have a role to play in God's great plan for humanity. But their goal then would be to get humanity to join them in their rebellion against God and ultimately in eternal damnation. From a Christian perspective, the greatest thing that God has done for us is the incarnation. God took on human form in the person of Jesus Christ. And because the devil wishes to mimic God in every possible way, he believes that he gets his own version of the incarnation, namely taking on human form by possessing a human body. But what he does with that body is distort it. The human person is created in the image and likeness of God. We have great value and great dignity. And the devil believes that by possessing a human body and then putting that body through all these theatrics, that it's really mocking God. So the goal would be to get humanity to join these fallen angels in their rejection of God and then follow the pathway into hell.
Okay. I'm not sure if you're familiar at all with Father Malachi Martin.
Yes.
He had some pretty radical theories. I'm familiar with them due to his series of interviews on Coast to Coast with Art Bell, and he brought up the perfectly possessed, and that is that there are people walking around who just are no longer people anymore, and they are like fully consumed. And he seemed to suggest that the number of people who are perfectly possessed has just increased and increased and increased. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that, and if something like that actually is happening.
Mm-hmm. Perfect possession, the way I would define the term, is that someone has chosen to unite their free will with the will of the devil. And then because the devil and that person are now living in a harmonious relationship, the devil doesn't need to manifest anymore because the devil has won that person over. People might use the term that they've sold their soul to the devil. So people who are perfectly possessed would not show any signs of demonic manifestation. And the devil doesn't need to do any of that. In fact, the manifestations are a clear indication that there is still an internal struggle taking place between the demon and that person as an individual. But a perfect possession, again, means the person has taken their free will and united it with the devil. So the devil's will becomes their own will. Because, again, from a Christian perspective, what's the one thing that God does not have from us that God desires is our free will. And so we can either choose to unite our free will with God, or we can choose to unite it with the demonic. And when people do it with the demonic, then you have a perfect possession.
Okay. And sorry, John, go ahead.
No, you're okay. I was just gonna riff on that, in that so we have all this we have access to all kinds of different things now, different forms of media. We can learn about this demonic stuff. We can get involved with it. Young people are ever increasingly interested in the occult. What do you think is the reason for that? That's inviting this evil into the world. And it seems like everybody's like, that's the big thing. The movies, it's popular, and people legitimately get involved with it, whether they realize that what they're doing is not a good thing or not.
One of the entry points that I identify, I call it the entertainment industry. Whether it's Halloween, which is coming up, you look at all these movies that are out. There are new movies out now. Exorcist Believer, the Pope's Exorcist, Nefarious, the original Exorcist, the Exorcism of Emily Rose. There's a lot of shows about paranormal activity and ghost hunting, all kinds of books and whatnot. So the devil has become very mainstream. And I think people are just fascinated by this character. But people need to realize that the demonic can play on a person's memory and imagination. So when we put all of these thoughts and ideas into our head, then the devil can use them as an opportunity to instill fear within us. And ultimately, anybody that lives in fear can be controlled. And that ultimately, that's what the devil would want. He would want us to be afraid, and then he will use that as a tool to try and manipulate and control us.
You mentioned, ghost hunting and paranormal. Um, I guess a good logical question would be, um, so when we die, our soul either ascends to heaven, or if you're not a believer or Christian who serves God, right? You would presumably end up going to hell. So um, if you experience anything paranormal, or ghost hunters who then go out and then find activity, the activity that is occurring would then have to always be demonic, right?
Absolutely. Because demons, again, they can masquerade. Sometimes people may think that they're encountering the spirit, maybe of one who has died. Most exorcists will tell you that what they're encountering are demons who are masquerading as these people that maybe we're trying to reach out to. Because demons are trying to make a connection or an attachment to us so they can kind of work on our brokenness, our woundedness, and try to use that as an avenue to get a foothold into our lives. The things about demons, they don't live in a location. So a demon doesn't live in the abandoned house or, hospital or prison. Because as pure spiritual creatures, they don't have a dwelling. In fact, we would say they're neither here nor there, but we would say they are here or there if they're choosing to act there. So why would a demon be acting and manifesting in the old prison, for example? Maybe it's the very things that people are doing there, trying to get their attention. Maybe there was some horrific crime or something that took place in that location. Because angelic creatures, good or fallen, their movement is by thought. They think it and they're there. They don't have to get in a car or a plane or anything like that. So their movement is by thought. So if somebody's in a location and trying to engage them, the demons then could say, they're trying to gain my attention. And then boom, they think it and they're there.
And you mentioned when you spoke about the media, the film The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And so that movie depicts what was the true case of, I believe her name was Analise Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
And, she was a girl who died after receiving something like 70 exorcisms. And then the priests were actually charged and then convicted for negligent murder. So you're obviously familiar with the case. How do you go about your exorcisms to avoid that happening, I guess?
And I think the way that I would deal with those situations, because I read that account, so I've learned a lot about it. There was some discrepancy whether or not she was actually possessed, or if the priest was too quick to come to that conclusion. I don't believe there's any such thing as an emergency exorcism. I will say, I get about 3,500 people a year who reach out to me for help. They come from all over the states, other parts of the world. Most of the people who contact me have already self-diagnosed. They believe that they're dealing with extraordinary demonic activity, even possession itself. But I can't just take their word for it. I have to follow some very strict protocols, again, that the church has put into place. And again, if one is dealing with the demonic, they should just be happy that somebody is taking them seriously and it wants to help them. Sometimes people get frustrated and they say, well, I don't care about the process. This is what I want you to do. But again, they don't get to decide how the church will act. The church herself kind of sets forth that particular procedure, if you will. And I think in that case of Analise Michelle, those priests acted too hastily, because there were some even other priests involved in that case who did not believe that it was demonic possession, but that it was a mental health issue. So it's just really important for, again, relying on the mental health expert, the medical doctor, maybe even some other priest to come in and just to look at the situation from different angles, and then to give the person the true help that they need. Because, by the time somebody contacts me, the one thing that I think we can all agree upon is that they are suffering. They're definitely suffering. But again, is that suffering due to spiritual, mental, or physical causes? And then once that is determined, that's the true help that the person should receive. Unfortunately, if I tell somebody that I've come to the conclusion that it's not demonic, we live in an age where you can find anyone who will validate what you believe. There was a gentleman one time who reached out to me from another state. I was able to set him up with a mental health professional in his area. But he said, no, it's not mental health. It truly is demonic. And I didn't believe that it was. But then he called me a few months later and said that he had been able to find a professional exorcist, so one who didn't operate within the confines of any faith tradition, and told him that, yes, you are possessed by 5 demons, and I will charge you $1,500 each to get rid of them. And the man paid him because he was desperate. So it is a sad reality that there are people out there who will prey on people's brokenness and who will tell them what they need to hear just for the sake of $1. But again, I don't want to tell people what they want to hear. I have to tell people what I believe they need to hear, just based on my expertise in this realm of exorcism.
So even with your checks and balances, have you ever seen somebody during an exorcism brought that far to the brink of death? Or is it more so that once you're involved and you have ruled everything out, and then it's just the process? Like once you're there, things will eventually just end up better, due to the work that you're doing?
Yeah. I've never worked with anyone that was on the brink of death. Because again, I think if the priest is following those very strict protocols of the church and has reached moral certitude in believing that, yes, beyond a doubt, this person is dealing with the demonic, and then when the rite itself begins, there's a prayer directed to God, who's asked to protect and watch over the person who's possessed and everyone else involved in the exorcism. And every exorcism that is prayed over a person will provide some benefit to them, even at that moment when that session comes to an end, that the demon is not completely cast out. So every exorcism, if it is true possession, will provide some benefit. You look at the case again of Analise Michelle, the 70 plus exorcisms that she received. If it was truly demonic, it would have been leading her to a better space in life and not to the point of where she died. So that would just tell me that there's a lot of red flags in that case, and perhaps it wasn't handled in the best possible way.
What are this? Sorry, Drew.
No,
what
go
are
ahead, go ahead.
What are the signs of, I guess, in your opinion, the telltale signs of possession?
It's just making a clear distinction that I know that I'm no longer speaking to this person as an individual, but that the demonic has truly taken over. People can masquerade and put on a show. Some people may do that as a way to make a mockery of the church and its belief on evil and the practice of exorcism. Some people can do that just because of mental health issues. So again, I reached a point where I just know beyond a doubt that this is something truly demonic. I even take it to prayer, asking God to guide and direct me in fully understanding what this person is suffering and dealing with. And then I think that also helps me, again, reach the conclusion that, yes, this is truly demonic, and not something of a mental health or a physical malady that the person is suffering from.
In your book, you mentioned that Catholics can fend off the devil through their ordinary life of faith. I was wondering if you were able to maybe elaborate on that a little bit. Is there a distinction between the life of faith of a Catholic versus, say, a Methodist or Protestant or something like that? Would um, would would you be more susceptible to those evils of the world if you're not practicing like a Catholic?
The 3,500 people that reach out to me annually, about half are Catholic, half come from other Christian faith traditions, other world religions, and then some from no faith background whatsoever. The church does view exorcism as a ministry of charity, so the church would be willing to listen and help anyone who turns to her. But again, in my book, when I mention that, I think I put in there that as a Catholic, if you're praying, you're going to Mass, celebrating the sacraments and reading the Bible, if you know and live your faith, the devil's already on the run. If people belong to another Christian faith tradition, if they're living out their relationship with God and they're praying and going to church, the same would be true. Catholics don't have a monopoly on the practice of exorcism. It's a liturgical rite, so that we have a very prescribed way for it to be done. It's a ritual, if you will. But in an exorcism, Jesus is the main actor. He's not a bystander. And Jesus can certainly act wherever he wills.
I have a question. It's more of a side question than what we're talking about. A lot of the priests that I've heard do interviews who are out practicing in exorcisms in ways that might be more dangerous than the practices that you adhere to have said that Rome and the Vatican may be infiltrated themselves by demons. And I wanted to just get your take on that real quick, just to clarify whether or not you agreed or disagreed or had any evidence to suggest that what they're saying was false to help with their narrative. Perhaps these are the people who are charging $1,500 per demon who are saying this.
Your question just makes me think of several different things. Jesus promised that the jaws of death would never prevail against the church. I also believe that the power and the authority has been given to the church. And if a priest were to step outside of that authority and then be acting on his own, I think that's a very dangerous place to be. Even the priest who trained me told me before I left Rome, he said, if you're ever doing an exorcism and you even say for a brief moment, wow, look at what I'm doing, he said, you've just walked on unholy ground, because it's not what you are doing as an individual. It's what God is doing through the church, and you as a priest, as an official representative of the church. So I don't think it's ever a good idea to step outside of the church and then to somehow have this arrogant mentality, if you will, that somehow it's all about you as the individual, rather than always keeping the focus on Christ himself, the power and the authority of his name, and then that which he has given to the church.
Are there any other examples of things you would like to debunk about demonic possessions while we've debunked that?
I would say, possession is not contagious. A demon can't just jump out of one person into another. We might see that happening in movies. One has to give permission, if you will, to the demon to come in. This can be done directly or indirectly. Directly, when somebody does something that we know is contrary to the ways that God calls us to live our lives. And then indirectly, when maybe somebody is dabbling with something they believe to be fun or entertaining, but they don't fully understand the gravity of the situation they may be putting themselves into. For example, somebody may play with the Ouija board and think, oh, it's just a harmless board game. Somebody may be involved in a seance or going to a cemetery at midnight and trying to conjure up the spirits of the dead. The devil doesn't care whether we do it directly or indirectly. He will always recognize any opportunity that people give him to begin to afflict us.
Okay, so you mentioned the Ouija board or seances, and immediately I started to wonder then, say there are six people who are sitting around a spirit board of some kind, and, they're not intentionally trying to do anything. Um, what really determines who of those six people might then create a connection with this demon versus the other five who might walk away from that, without, still being, cleansed from it?
Demons can watch us, they can observe us, they can deduce what we might be thinking or how we might act. So if people are sitting around a board game, again, such as the Ouija board, some people may be impacted, some may not. It may be based on the level of our faith, what the devil knows about us. It may instill fear, again, from watching and observing us. So it really depends on the individual character of the person, what they're involved in. There may be somebody there. We talked earlier about perfect possession. Maybe there's somebody there that's perfectly possessed. So they would show no signs of any type of demonic affliction. So it would really be looking at each person as an individual and just the state of their own spiritual life.
Is it just as simple as maintaining your faith in God to prevent something like this from happening to you?
I think absolutely. So there is something called demonic oppression, and that's where somebody is being afflicted by the devil. Not that they've done anything wrong, but God is permitting it as an opportunity for that person to show their fidelity to God. It's always easy to say you're a God-fearing person, if you will. God-fearing in the sense that you live in awe of God, not that you're afraid of God. But when everything's going good, it's easy to be that type of person. It's another thing when the world around you begins to fall apart. Can you still be a God-fearing person? Think of Job in the Old Testament. God permitted Satan to afflict him. He didn't do anything wrong, but God permitted it. Think of St. Paul himself in the New Testament. He speaks of the thorn in his flesh, the messenger from Satan who was sent to torment him to keep him from becoming proud. Many of the great saints of the church experienced demonic oppression. Again, they didn't do anything wrong. St. Catherine of Siena, for example. Think of St. John Vianney, St. Padre Pio. Again, they didn't do anything wrong, but God permitted it as a way to test them. And then as a result of what they went through, they actually grew in holiness and virtue. If you know the story of Job, at the end of it, after he's lost everything, he maintains his fidelity to God, and then God blesses him 100-fold.
So a person would then have to live that, like that. You have to live it 24/7. That's your faith. If you find yourself in a situation that is scary or terrifying, or that there is clearly something, coming for you or attacking you, or in some way trying to possess you, you then can't call upon God in that moment to ask for protection, um, because deep within you don't actually believe it. So in that moment, are you able to then kind of reassert yourself to the faith, or would that person still be susceptible and then have to go through, an exorcism?
The question might be how sincere is the person. As long as we are sincere in calling out to the Lord, he will always respond. Again, oftentimes when people are in crisis, they recognize their need for God, but then when the crisis passes over, they may forget about God. There's a line in Luke's gospel where it speaks about in chapter 11 how once the demon is cast out, it goes and wanders through the arid wasteland, and then coming back and finding the house swept clean. Then it goes and finds 7 other demons worse than itself, and they come and take up residence in the person. Being swept clean means it's gone, but God hasn't been invited in. And then when one fails to invite God in, demons know that they've been successful in the past. They can be successful again. And so they can come back and afflict the person to a degree that is much worse than it was the first time.
Talked a lot about possession, but I believe there are, according to your book, there are 5 extraordinary activities of the devil.
There are 4. So we've been talking about
4. Okay,
possession.
4.
There is demonic infestation, the presence of evil in a location associated with an object, even an animal. An animal can be possessed. We know that to be true based on chapter 5 of Mark's Gospel, where Jesus cast the demons into the swine. So we know that animals could be possessed. There is demonic vexation, physical attacks, and then demonic obsession, which are mental attacks.
What differentiates those from one another, so to speak? What would be the difference between that or an infestation?
You think of vexation, physical attacks, obsession, mental attacks, the person is under siege. With possession, the devil has already won them over. They're no longer under siege. And then infestation would just be, again, the presence of evil in the location with the object and animal, whereby the demons are just trying to cause fear.
So you could walk away from an infestation still whole, without that a demon then attaching themselves to you if you play your cards right, so to speak.
Yeah, and the fact is, we're all sinners. We all do things wrong. But do we repent? Do we give it back to God and we say, I'm sorry? Because the unique thing about Christianity is that it's not about God. It's not about our search for God. It's about God's search for us. God is always looking for the human person who is lost. Jesus begins his public ministry by going into the desert, into the wilderness after he's baptized. The first one he encounters is the devil who tries to tempt him. And I would suggest the reason that Jesus went into the desert, into the wilderness, is to go in search of lost humanity, because when Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise, they were cast out into that wilderness. So God is always looking for us. Even after Adam sins, in the book of Genesis, we are told God moves through the garden and says, Adam, where are you? Now, did God not know where he was? Obviously not. He wants to see if Adam will own up to his sinfulness. And as long as we can own up to our sinfulness, God is always ready to forgive us. In fact, the greatest thing that we can know are not the sins that we can commit, but God's love and mercy.
Are there any churches that could become infested with demonic activity, or is that ground sacred, so to speak? Is that almost like a safe zone for somebody that if they felt like they were being attacked, that they could then walk in there and have a moment of clarity away from it? Or once a person then falls under these attacks and they enter a church, is there really no difference to them at all?
No, I think anybody can turn to any church community, any faith tradition, if they feel like they're being afflicted, and get some type of help. Most of the people who contact me, a lot of them don't have a church home. And I always say that people do need to have some type of church home because they need ongoing pastoral care. They need somebody to listen to them and give them some guidance and direction. And that's certainly going to take place at their local church. And then maybe the pastor of that church would say, what you're dealing with is a little above my comfort zone or my ability to deal with. Let me refer you to someone else. It's like going to see your family doctor. Your doctor says, yeah, I want to really send you to a specialist and have some more tests done. But then once you're done with a specialist, you need to go back to your family doctor. So even the people I work with, it's important for them to have a church home because when I'm finished working with them, they need to go back to their church home where they can just have that ongoing care and they can live out the normal aspects of their faith, pray, go to church, read the Bible, and so on.
Do you ever feel, I don't want to use the word tempted, but maybe more so attacked or targeted? Do you ever feel targeted by the demons that you then fight? You said that it's not contagious, but after an exorcism and maybe on your flight home or your drive home, or when you're finally away from it and within your own dwelling, do you ever feel targeted, so to speak, by the things that you're fighting?
Oh, most definitely. The devil knows those who are trying to work against him and to defeat him. That's why it's so important for anyone involved in this ministry to really live out a strong spiritual life and to have a strong connection with God. Even the times that I've suffered, my own demonic attacks from the devil, I also realized that the devil can only do that which God permits. So why did God permit the demon to do this to me? And we can all use the devil for our own advantage. An enemy will only attack where he believes there is a perceived weakness. So if the devil allows us to see a weakness in our spiritual armor, then we now know where we need to put in more effort to grow in holiness and virtue and be the person that God wants us to be. So anytime I've ever experienced any type of attack, I always say, what does God want me to take away from this experience? So I don't say, wow, I'm afraid of what the devil did to me. I really say, what is God trying to teach me? Why did God permit this to happen?
If you're hit my mic, if you're comfortable answering this question, and it doesn't have to be a personal, your own attack experience, but just what is one experience that you've encountered from this that just really, you know in your head as an imprint of, this is happening, you know the Lord's working through me to resolve these possessions or infestations or whatever, and it's just something that you've always taken away, good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
from your work.
A very recent experience, and I don't know that I've really shared this with anyone before, but recently I had a demon appear to me in a dream. Now, I did not dream of the demon, but the demon appeared to me in a dream. Think of the correlation in where St. Joseph in the New Testament, an angel appears to him in a dream and says, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt. So this demon appeared to me in my dream, and we were actually having a conversation where the demon is asking me, well, why do you do this? Why do you fight against us? Don't you know that ultimately we are going to win? So the battle has already been determined. Why don't you just give up? And then having that dialogue back and forth. And then I clearly remember saying, I've had enough of this conversation. You need to be gone. And then the demon left.
So it's just reaffirming faith to keep control over the situation is,
Absolutely. Because the
and that
focus is always on God. The danger, I think, today is that a lot of people view the exorcist as a magician. They think that I have a secret bag of tricks or whatever, and I can make the demons go away. But again, it's not about me. I don't have any special powers or abilities. Again, the power always comes from God, and the priest is permitting God to use him as a tool, if you will, to bring relief into the lives of those who are suffering. We can even say that in an exorcism, the demon is commanded to return that which it has stolen, namely a person created in the image and likeness of God. Another way to look at it, if a house is infested with bugs and you go in and turn on a light, the bugs all scurry for every crack and crevice. They want to get out of the light and back into the darkness. In an exorcism, the church is throwing the light of Jesus Christ onto these demons, and every time that she does that, they will flee and scurry back to the darkness of hell.
And that's really the message of your book, is don't be afraid. God is stronger than these demons.
Yeah, and it's so basic, and yet a lot of people may not fully comprehend that. In the 32 years that I've been a priest, I think one of the things that I've been able to see is that there are a lot of people out there who have a distorted image of God. It's almost like we've recreated God in our image and likeness, that we expect God to do this or to say that God has to act the way that we expect. But again, it's not about, us recreating God. It's simply about us being the people that God created us to be. And if we're doing that, the devil's already on the run. If we mess up, all we have to do is own it, give it back to God. Even from a Catholic perspective, we would say that a good confession is better than an exorcism. Because once we confess our sins, we give them over to God. And once we place them in the hands of God, the devil can no longer use them against us. God is always ready to forgive. Because remember, Christianity is about God's search for humanity. So God wants us to be found. We just have to reach out to him. There's a great image, in the Sistine Chapel, the story of creation. People may have seen the painting by Michelangelo, where God is floating on a cloud, ironically in the shape of a human brain, if you look at it closely. And then the finger of God is stretching out to the finger of Adam. And God's finger is completely straight, but Adam's is crooked. So what he has to do is to lift his finger to touch the finger of God. So God is extending the invitation, but Adam has to accept it. And it's the same for all of us. And once we accept the invitation from God, he will always protect and safeguard us. And why? Because all of us are created in the image and likeness of God. And we have great value and dignity in the eyes of God.
Yeah. I have two more questions, if you're willing to go into them. One is more lighthearted and fun, and the other one is, political and scary. So I'll do the lighthearted and fun one first, and just ask you about your experience with Zach Baggins. I did not see this, but I read that you had done a television special with him where you were, I think, trying to rid a house of an infestation, and it was eventually demolished. Is that accurate?
It wasn't me. That was the case that came out of Gary, Indiana, where a woman said that her child was possessed. People even saw her child crawl up the wall like a spider. And then this priest did an exorcism. And then people started to break into that home because they figured, well, that's where the demonic possession took place. So they wanted to be in that environment. But then the people who bought the house, in fact, I believe it was the people who made the movie The Conjuring, they kind of bought the rights to all of that. But then they demolished the house to prevent people from breaking into it. But that was the case that came out of the Diocese of Gary in northern Indiana, up near Chicago.
Yeah, okay. Wikipedia has their information incorrect.
What? Something on the computer, the internet is wrong? I can't believe that.
Everything is facts on the internet.
John, do you have Do you have anything before I jump into this like last dark kind of question?
No, I'm afraid I don't know what you're going to ask. Do I know this question?
Nah, we're just witnessing some geopolitical stuff right now that I just wanted to get your opinion
Ugh.
on because what's happening in the Middle East is it's being covered everywhere, and we know that that's kind of ground zero for a lot of what's written as far as when we see Jesus return. So I guess what I'm just wondering is, are we witnessing something biblical right now happening?
I don't know if that's the case or not. Certainly, the situations in the world today, especially in the Middle East, are very horrific. They're very tragic. We can see forces of evil that have been unleashed. You know, the devil may not be the cause of all of our problems, but the devil is an opportunist. He's quick to insert himself into any situation so that he can take a bad situation and make it even worse. The Bible clearly tells us that no one knows the end but the Father, not even the Son. And I don't really think it's helpful when people start speculating on whether or not it's the end of times, because ultimately we can't control any of that. What we can control is our relationship with God. And again, if we're living in that right relationship with God, then the end is nothing to fear. We all know that eventually it will come. We don't know when that will happen. But again, as long as we are living in that right relationship with God, there's nothing to fear whatsoever. Evil operates on fear. So you look at all the violence and terrorism in the world today, it's meant to instill fear because people who live in fear can be controlled and manipulated. People who choose to live in the love of God and trust in Him, they cast out fear. Bible even says, perfect love, perfect faith will cast out fear. So to me, the most important thing is always to focus on God and the goodness in the world, and then to realize that we already know the end of the story. God wins. And if we already know that, whose side should we choose to be on? Namely, the side of God.
I tend
That,
to,
que- that question wasn't that bad.
yeah. Well, depending on where we went with it, it could have got real dark and crazy. I'm glad it didn't, though. Do you have anything that you want to promote? Any upcoming appearances? Obviously, you have your book. You're free to do that.
Exorcism, the battle against Satan and his demons. I just finished reading it. I recommend everybody check it out. It's a short read too, so if you're not a reader,
Yeah. And I
it's
think,
100
when I
pages.
wrote that book during COVID lockdown, I was asked to write that book after I gave a talk at the St. Louis University before COVID. And I thought, how would I ever find the time to write a book being, dealing with 3,500 requests a year, pastoring two churches. But during COVID lockdown, I had the opportunity to write that book. And I do think it's written in a very easy reading style, just to give people some very basic information and an opportunity just to think about what they believe. Because being in public in the ministry, it really is just presenting information to people, and then what they do with that is up to them. I'm not out there trying to drag somebody into believing what I believe. I just want to get them to think and maybe take that information and use it as an opportunity to draw more closely to God. That book was published by Emmaus Road Publishing. And then I just recently completed a 10-course presentation on the ministry of exorcism. So that's something that will be coming out from the St. Paul Center
I saw that
right at
online.
Halloween. Good
Yep.
timing.
Good timing,
Yeah.
right?
Well, I want
But
to
yeah,
thank you for coming on to our show. You don't understand the amount of gratitude that we have for it. This was an incredible conversation, and I'm very grateful that you took the time to talk to us today.
It's been a
yes.
pleasure. I'm happy to accept many different invitations and different audience groups. I don't always want to just preach to the choir, so to speak, but to maybe put the message out there for an audience that may not typically hear something like this. And again, just give people something to think about and just to challenge them about what they really believe in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Perfect.
we appreciate it again, and anytime
100%.
anytime you want to have another conversation, you are absolutely welcome to come back onto the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Father.
much. Now,
God bless.
that's going to conclude our show, and I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen to this conversation. It's a very important conversation, and I think a faith reaffirming conversation. So I think that anybody who took the time to listen to this should really think about the topic at hand, and have a wonderful day. And thanks for squatching.
Thanks.